What do the endings in Five Nights at Freddy's Secret of the Mimic hide from the player behind the scenes? As we approach the biggest choice in Secret of the Mimic, we have the option to branch off into a bad ending, what is assumed to be a true ending, and of course a third secret ending. We'll be taking a closer look behind the scenes at all these endeavors that take place throughout these endings to see how they are set up and function, including these little minions that are sent after us, amongst other out-of-bounds things. Like, did you know the Mimic is hiding on the roof? Our character Arnold is eager to escape this nightmare facility though, so without any further delay, let's dive into each of these endings one by one. So we've just escaped our terrifying feline friend down these dark corridors as we make our way back to the main area. Dispatch will be pleased that we found the schematics, as they inform us to head back to the security office so that we can wrap things up. Once we get to the office, Dispatch will again congratulate us, but from this point forward, our course of actions will dictate what ending we experience. Dispatch will inform us that we now need to put the data diver into the inventory system. Doing this will, in turn, result in the bad ending to the game, so we'll go ahead and do this one first. Once we turn in the data diver, it will result with Dispatch simply advising that it's all over now, and that we can head on out, as they've opened the garage for us. Coming over to the van as we approach the door will end the sequence, unlocking the clock out achievement. With the scene ending as we approach the van, we'll load in as we're now driving off from this nightmare. Dispatch then informs us they couldn't reach us, as the Mimic cloned their voice, and blames us for losing company property. Following this, we'll hear something in the back of the van as we're ambushed by the Mimic. After the attack on Arnold, we'll end up coming to, as we've been stuffed into a suit, with the credits rolling in the background. The Mimic can also be seen standing off to the side as we've reached the conclusion of the bad ending. Let's take a look at how all this pans out from another perspective though. So, coming back to this part where we are prompted to leave our device, we'll once again put the data diver into the inventory system. The data diver will simply disappear when doing this, as we've covered this already with previous objects being placed in the system. Zooming out here, we'll see the entirety of the area at this point, which is basically just the places around us we're able to traverse. Taking a closer look, I figured that we may get a glimpse of the Mimic in the back of the van here, seeing as it ends up in it while we're driving off into the sunrise. However, as you can see, it is nowhere in sight. We wouldn't be able to normally see in the back of the van anyways, because the scene ends when the player approaches the driver's side door. Watching this from this angle shows how everything will unload and load in instantaneously as we approach the door. With the previous area completely gone, we're loaded into the whole driving sequence now, which is this long strip of road with trees and whatnot. Going down and under this portion of the map though, you'll see the area where Arnold ends up, where the credits roll, etc. Since it's already here, we can check this area out before we end up here with Arnold. As you can see, not much has taken place down here, while Arnold's still up above driving in the van, which follows with a bit of exploring on our end, but that's about it. So I went back up to the van as Arnold continues his drive, where we can see parts of the vehicle sliding on the ground, essentially being linked to the van as it travels down the road. This debris we're seeing is actually not used for this particular ending, but it does make sense why it's here, seeing that this whole driving portion is used in a similar fashion in two endings. Anyway, we can see the Mimic is not visible in the back of the van at this point, but will eventually load in for the jump scare. When playing normally, if you pay attention, you can actually see the rear view mirror's display change when the Mimic loads in, as the mirror goes dark, then lights up, following with the Mimic assault. Watching all of this occur is obviously pretty silly from this perspective, as we can watch these arms duke it out with the Mimic. As you'll see though, both Arnold's arms and the Mimic will simply disappear as the sequence ends. The shuttering of our eyelids will then take place, indicating that Arnold's now on the stage below us. The whole outside area with a stretch of road will be frozen at this point, and will remain so for the rest of the sequence. Breaking off camera while we're in the suit though, we'll see how the credits are scrolling, but that's ultimately it. I wasn't able to break out the suit that we're being held prisoner in, but we can see how it looks up on the stage here, as it's just the floating arms and head. That concludes our exploration of the bad ending though, so let's continue on and check out the true ending. Coming back to the security office, we're going to not hand over the data diver this time, which displeases the dispatch imposter. Using the computer console, we're going to want to run parachute.exe. This, in turn, will unlock the parachute achievement, and will also give us access to the secret air duct that we'll want to go down. Dispatch's tone will change once coming down here, stating we're not going to make it out alive now. While traversing through this following area, you'll see that we're being diverted on a particular path, as certain passages are being blocked as we carry on. It's a lengthy path, but eventually we'll find ourselves back in a familiar area. Starting the goodbye show will allow us to gain access down below, where we'll need to hit this button that rises from the floor. Doing this, we'll begin to be lowered down underground, in a creepy manner, if I may add. This follows with a minigame-like sequence, where we need to pull these levers in order to keep the elevator moving, all while being chased by Big Top. Yup, it's still kicking, and it's going to chase us throughout this elevator ride. With enough speed though, we can get through this part safely, as Big Top runs out of juice for good this time. I think. Let's backtrack though, and go back through what we just endured, to take a closer look at it all. So as you saw, we have to run this parachute.exe in order to have this couch grant us access to the ventilation shaft. When I was opening it, in this particular instance, I noticed that something was going on outside the door as well. So after deleting the door, I came out to investigate. I realized what I was seeing was a portion of the level loading in, which is tied to the path we just opened and need to take for the true ending. It even interacts with us, as this particular gate activates to block our way, all while not technically being in there. It was curious that I could see this from the door of the security room though. Did any of you see this load in like this during your playthrough? Obviously, this makes sense with the whole path loading in, as we'd normally be dropping down into it at this point. I was just surprised that this portion was visible from the security room. Moving on, going through this whole area with the gates that close on you led me to deleting them to see if they went anywhere. Unsurprisingly, it leads to nowhere. Same goes for all the other paths that end up being blocked by gates and debris, as you'll see how they all lead to an empty void. Pushing on though, we'll be able to see how the next area loads in as we progress through the vent. It's the area where we need to start the goodbye show. Once the player starts the show, we're able to see how the elevator shaft is loaded in below, along with what appears to be a textureless model of Big Top that's floating out here. I'm not entirely sure what purpose this has out here, seeing as there's another Big Top over here chillin', as it awaits for us to use the elevator and begin the chase sequence. Taking a wider look at everything that's currently in game, I ended up seeing some white specks in the void. Going in closer reveals that one of them is the intercom mic from the security office, with the others appearing to be random lights. Getting back on track, I activated the elevator. During this, you'll see how the goodbye show area will unload, as we're now in Big Top's sights. I had to change my view at this point because I couldn't tell which gears were locked in the elevator. This led to taking another look at the random Big Top that's floating out here, as it's clearly more frightening in the normal view. The entire chase is pretty cool to check out from these perspectives though, as the game speed is crawling at the moment, but Big Top does end up catching me here. Because of how I was using the camera though, as I switched back to Arnold, the death animation was glitched and caught me off guard with how aggressive it looked. Unglorious. After being traumatized by Big Top, I had to reload, and then I attempted to delete it out of existence for the crime it just committed. It unfortunately didn't work, but once we complete the elevator sequence, we can see how large debris will load up above Big Top as it crashes down on him. This happened fast when I was observing it, leading me to think that the game speed was increased at some point, which ended up not being the case. Regardless, that concluded this elevator scene, but I did attempt to go out of bounds over here, seeing as it looked like an area I could explore. Very quickly, I found this to be a mistake, as the floor unloaded as I warped to it, resulting with me forever falling into the dark void. On that note, let's now continue on, shall we? So with Big Top out of the way, we'll push on, as Dispatch continues making threats and claims that we just don't understand. Even the Cleanovac isn't fooled by this imposter. Take a listen.
Why don't you trust me?
You're not him! You're not! Stop sounding like him!
Eventually, we find ourselves in a familiar area. It's the area we end up at when completing the game with a bad ending. Luckily, we're not trapped in the suit this time, and it seems safe here, but coming over to this computer and activating the stage lights will escalate things pretty quickly. The Mimic will rise out of the debris in front of us, as we have to immediately take cover. Other than not getting caught, what we need to do here is find these spring lock suits that are within these curtain areas. Taking each suit to one of these doors with the cameras and leaving it there will drain the system of its power. There's 4 in total we need to find, and once setting them all up accordingly, we'll disable the power, granting us access to this computer. In short, the computer wants us to get a message to Edwin, and wants to repair M2, aka the Mimic. This follows with us needing to make our way to the house, which entails this trek through more tunnels, and this curious cart ride we must take to proceed. We'll look at all this more closely in a little bit, but it leads to this elevator, which follows with eventually arriving at the house. Here is another cat and mouse scenario, as we must avoid the mimic once again, all while collecting these reels of film that can be found throughout the area. Each one has a number at the end of the film, and if we remember these numbers and the colors of the reels, we can figure out this code we need for this keypad. We'll want to punch the numbers in the same color order of David's name in this photo here. This will lead us upstairs, where we'll see that the house has seen better days. Getting on this computer will grant us access to the surveillance room that's behind this bookshelf though. Accessing the computer in this room and running the cradle.exe will prompt our next chase scene, as the mimic has found us. At this point, we're going to want to make a run for it through this area and reach this elevator to escape. Before proceeding any further though, let's go back and take a closer look at all this behind the scenes while breaking some things. Coming back from where we just escaped Big Top, we'll see how the area will unload, with this whole next area loaded in. Other than the security room intercom mic floating out here still, nothing out of the ordinary is taking place out of bounds during the majority of this particular encounter with the mimic. But it was intriguing to navigate throughout the entirety of the area mimic-free. Speaking of, when activating the stage lights, we can observe the mimic rise from its slumber in slow motion, which I found to be amusing. The mimic didn't find this funny, of course, as it tries to get us, but I managed to warp back to the stage to see if it kept us safe. It in fact was safe, but now we're basically blocked from progressing, with the only way out being, well, to embrace the mimic's cold metal hands. Unglorious. When entering these suits, we can see how we just become floating arms, along with the head of the suit, which we've touched on previously. Following this though, I decided to shrink the mimic, which was amusing to observe. Just look at him go! Like I said, not much is happening here outside of normal gameplay. As you can see, this is how it looks in the normal view. Moving on, under the Fiona computer we end up talking to, we can see some monitors are under it, which I didn't expect to see. Once we take the tunnel down toward the cart we end up getting on though, you'll see how the area that we were just previously in unloads. All that remains now is the suits that we had to place in front of the cameras. That's when I noticed that the entire cart ride had loaded in as well, along with some random stuff floating in the distance. Amongst the floating objects are these mini animatronics that are running in place. They look a bit goofy like this. Coming back down to this cart ride though, I deleted the rail and decided to walk instead. The door does open for us, but as soon as we reach the end, we're locked in and warped to where the cart normally takes us. This isn't what I wanted. As you can see though, this is how it would normally look if we're taking the cart accordingly, which explains why I was placed in the cart during my walk. I tried escaping the cart during this ride, but it's not letting me. So instead I warped over to this side without starting the cart. This allowed me to venture through this whole area, and most of the walls have no collision. I accidentally walked off the map to my death though. Getting to this elevator, we'll see how once we use it, we're being teleported like we've seen before, with this particular elevator here being the one we were just in. We've now loaded in the house. This is where I became slightly confused, as these animatronics are still running here in place. However, progressing will show them unloading, along with the upper levels of the house. Next we have the whole film collecting, as we figure out the code for the door we must use. Instead, I just went and deleted the door, as I made my way through, prompting the upstairs area to load back in again. I couldn't help but notice that these suits from before were still ominously present, floating out here in the void, as if they're haunted by the spirits of kids. Go away! We can see how the skybox is set up here, which is mostly for when we find ourselves in that exposed room, but we can also find the mimic just chilling up here on top of the roof. What you doing up there, man? I tried my best to view the mimic warping behind us, as it is the one that ends up chasing us, but it's nearly instantaneous and difficult to see in action. I did manage to get out of the mimic's reach though, resulting with it walking in place. Warping behind it at this point, you can see it's not happy, as it cannot come after us. It clearly still sees us though. After it destroyed me while I was trying to sneak by, I ended up getting stuck behind these barrels, which resulted with some much needed teasing, as we deny it Arnold's soul. With that though, let's push on normally so we can see how all this culminates. So we'll make our escape from the mimic as we take this elevator down. It'll stop multiple times as we can see the places falling apart. Those little animatronics we saw earlier will be running towards us through the hall during the elevator ride. Coming over to the cart ride, we'll find out that it's not working correctly, given the destruction around us. The mimic will come crashing down through the elevator right after this, following with a chase sequence. We'll have to crawl our way out of this debris, as we don't want to slack off during this chase, because the mimic will capitalize on it. It's at this point that we'll start seeing these small animatronics chasing us now. Choosing the wrong path here is fatal. However, navigating through here accordingly will eventually lead to this encounter with the Mimic. It drops down as it has the player trapped. Luckily though, the catwalk from above falls, resulting with a new path to take. The structure is barely holding it together at this point, but getting to this cart ride will give the player a moment to breathe. After this fairly long ride, we'll see that a fire has broken out as we now need to make our way through this inferno. During my first playthrough, I never really stopped moving through here, as I wasn't sure if I was being followed. This turned out to be the right move though, because it's clearly escalating as we make our way to the van. This follows with Arnold driving like a maniac, as the van is crawling with robotic critters now. The Mimic is amongst the carjackers and proceeds to force Arnold into a car accident. After being rolled in the van, Arnold will come to, as we're lying within the flip van, unable to move. The Mimic will start approaching the van like Batman and ends up taking the data diver from us. It will then embrace the data diver as it walks off, with the credits rolling immediately after. Let's see this now from behind the scenes. So as we leave the Mimic behind in the elevator, you'll see it will just freeze here in position once it's out of the player's view. We can now see why these particular animatronics were in this awkward spot though, as this is where they wait, being assigned to run at the elevator during this scene. All of the bots will eventually make their way into the hall while coming at us here, but will freeze once out of view along with the area unloading. They'll remain floating up here during our entire elevator trip too. When the Mimic comes crashing down through the elevator, you can see how it just appears within the shaft. The location where it was pulled from is what I'm not quite sure of though. As it chases us into this crawl space of debris, we can see how it actually will just stand behind back here. Even when we see the Mimic scaling the ceiling at this part, if we go back, you'll see how this one still remains, as there are multiple Mimic models being used here. Getting to where all the little guys start pursuing us was difficult to navigate and explore, but with it being tight quarters and how they essentially surround the player over time, it's proved to be difficult. Now, we can see from this view though, how the death animation looks when they perform it. They'll all just sort of stand around after the player's death, as this allows me the time to find them all scattered about in this area. It was cool to see how they look up close while I explore the bigger area, where they're crawling up the walls and whatnot. This is when I noticed the Mimic T-posed outside the map though, as I suspect it's waiting for its cue to cut us off during the chase. Dying will result with multiple animatronics joining the Mimic out here, as they're all infused in their T-poses. If you look closely, you can see how the Mimic is warped into the catwalk area too. When the catwalk saves us and comes down on the Mimic, it falls and freezes just above the lava here, where it remains indefinitely, at least during this chase. Once we get on the cart ride to escape though, we can see how all of our small robo-friends are already loaded in, making for a peculiar sight. It was neat, however, to see how this particular track continued on out of bounds, with this dead-end track out here. Perhaps it may have been a scrapped idea that involves a cart ride going on a little longer? Just a thought, I suppose, but once the cart ride ends here, we'll see how the entirety of this area will begin generating in. This is where we can see the whole facility now, as there's not much else to see outside this aerial view. Inside though, we can see how the little bots are frantically running about, as some of them run on loops. They'll run their designated route, which ends with them warping back to where they started, just to repeat the process. At this point though, I try to come over to this area with Arnold to see if I could play with our little bot buddies. I was able to break through, but was only able to walk so far before clipping through the floor, being forever lost to the void for the millionth time. Moving on though, you'll see that getting to the van and the transition that takes place with this view is near instantaneous, with the bots loading in a second later. Watching them load in, we can see how they appear all at once. Even the Mimic's up above the van, floating as it awaits its cue. I must say though, watching the entirety of this whole scene from this perspective was a trip. One by one the small guys will unload, as the Mimic ends up being the only remaining bot left. When the Mimic made us roll the van, it was pretty cool to watch in slow motion, with all the debris floating about. Eventually the van does vanish during this crash, as the one on all four wheels appears again? This confused me at first, but after thinking about it, I believe the screen is normally blacked out this time, which would explain this brief moment of driving, seeing as it does immediately change into the flip van in a short time. Of course, now we can see why the van debris has been tied to the vehicle in every instance we've seen it, as it's used for this particular scene. The Mimic will spawn in at this point and proceed to snatch the data diver from us, which just appears on our person when it goes to grab it. However, once the credits roll, the Mimic will vanish as the van proceeds to drive away. This driving basically continues throughout the entire credits. We can see how the level generates, like it did at the start of the game, essentially creating a never-ending road for the van to drive on. The bad ending area is here too, along with those signs, but that's pretty much it. However, it's now time to take a look at the secret ending though, and the moon area before it. Now, in order to get the last ending to the game, you need to collect all 25 collectibles and then finish the moon.exe program. This can only be done in New Game Plus. You've probably seen a few number locked doors in the game at this point, which contribute to your total collectible count. I'm not going to cover all the collectible locations, nor the moon.exe solution, since you're not here for a completionist guide, and it would take a long time. But there's one area that's really interesting that introduces us to a new antagonist. So in the retail showroom, if you punch in the code 80625, you'll gain access to an elevator that takes you into a basement area that was previously inaccessible and only viewable from down the giant hole in the theater. Down here, the Sleepy Moon lurks, and we must collect multiple pieces to this power puzzle to clear the area and obtain the David's Ball collectible. But now let's take a look at this place behind the scenes. Getting down here, we can see the entirety of this area is filled with a lot of junk, as it appears to not be in the greatest condition. The terrifying moon can be found lurking about with its horrific smile lighting the way. If we go into the files here, we can mess around with the different models associated with this entity. There's a few here that we can change it into, including the Mimic, Captain Springlock, and the Swing Bee suit. Regardless of what it's chosen, the emissive materials remain when switching these around, as they too light the way while walking about. Unfortunately, I couldn't do much more with this, seeing as the game would crash quite often. So carrying on, I took a closer look out of bounds, with not much luck finding anything new or surprising. The areas around here are pretty barren, as you can see as I fly around. But let's take a look at the moon's jump scare. So it will dance about with that terrifying face. Did I mention the moon creeps me out? Out of all the characters, I'd say this one is S tier creepy. I think lore-wise it's a possessed suit, or a human, and not the Mimic. Anyway, we can also see up the hole that the giant moon made when it fell through the floors from way up above. Looks like Link wasn't able to save Termina in time. Aw man. Now that we have all the collectibles and cleared moon.exe, we'll get a glitched access state on our data diver that'll let us open previously locked doors within the house on the hill. We must now deny giving our data diver to start the longer ending again, and when we get to the house, there are 6 items we must collect and place into these machines here. Once all 6 are obtained, the vent in this room will open and take us to a bedroom for our final encounter. We'll want to have the White Tiger collectible on our person when getting here, which can be placed on this fancy podium. Doing this will prompt a bedtime story to start playing, as the Mimic can be seen in the closet. In short, we must help the machine complete the bedtime story by pressing the correct buttons, which can be solved by using this picture on the wall here. The Mimic will continuously try to get us throughout this, but eventually we'll find ourselves plugging the data diver into M2, which will give us the storytime achievement, following with the Mimic basically going to bed, concluding with the secret ending. Exploring the secret ending now, I noticed that the podium we use can be found way out of bounds here for some reason. If you're paying attention, you can also see how the door to this room is actually boarded up too. I found it curious that there is absolutely nothing in the closet before we activate the bedtime story, which makes sense I guess. However, I feel like it made it that much more noticeable when the Mimic is inside it, as we can blatantly see it load in front of us during normal gameplay. So in an attempt to break this ending, I tried warping myself away from the podium to see if it would prevent the Mimic from getting me. I sadly can't walk anywhere during this, and unfortunately my plan doesn't work, as the Mimic rocks me from across the room. This was the telltale sign that I wasn't going to be able to mess with much during this whole interaction with our beloved best friend. It was pretty sweet though, to be able to see a nice ending for a change. I don't know what Arnold does after this, but good job buddy, you deserve a prize. I can just smell that $25 gift certificate, can't you? With that though, we've concluded our complete behind-the-scenes journey in Five Nights at Freddy's Secret of the Mimic. I do hope you enjoyed this game-breaking look at this game, as it was pretty fun to venture through, and I look forward to seeing all of you with my next video. Cheers!